FPS or frames per second. You see this word being mentioned almost everywhere in technology now. Whether it's when you buy a new phone, it tells you what FPS it records videos at, or whether your computer can run games on 60 frames per second or not, unlike consoles. So what does FPS mean exactly? To understand this, we first need to understand how videos work. There is a different name for videos, which is motion pictures. Motion means something that moves, and pictures, well, pictures. There are many still pictures in a video, and these pictures are kept together one after another, and when they move, then it seems like we are watching a video. So whenever you record a video with a camera, the camera actually takes multiple pictures one after another. So the amount of pictures the camera will take in 1 second is what's called FPS, or frames per second. So if you select 30 frames per second option in your camera, then the camera will take 30 pictures per second. If you choose 60, then it will take 60 pictures per second, and so on. And each picture the camera takes is called a frame. Now many have a question regarding how many frames per second should they record videos at. Many think that the more you increase the FPS settings, then the more your video will be smoother. But that's wrong, because most of the movies you watch are played in 24 frames per second. That's because there is a lot of motion blur in 24 frames per second, which is relatively close to how our eyes see in real life. And that's why movies are played at 24 frames per second, and it's called cinematic frame rate. And the standard is 30 frames per second, which we see on YouTube videos and television. So when are you supposed to shoot at a higher frame rate? If you want to add a slow motion effect, then you have to record at a higher frame rate. The required minimum is 60 frames per second, meaning if you record in 60 frames per second, then if you slow it down to 30 frames per second, then your video speed will decrease by half. Today, the slowest video recorded was at 10 trillion frames per second, with which humans could record the speed of light in slow motion. Other than that, the consumer cameras that are released right now can record videos up to 500,000 frames per second. So what if you record videos at 60 or higher frames per second, but you have no intention of adding a slow motion effect? Then what will be the problem? Well, whenever our eyes see something moving, we also see motion blur. For example, when this hand moves, you can't see the fingers properly due to motion blur, and our eyes see it the same way in real life. But when you record videos at a higher frame per second, then you will be able to see those fingers individually, because there won't be any motion blur, and it doesn't look realistic. And it might not be soothing for our eyes either. The second problem is that when you edit the video, then it might be too heavy for your computer and software to handle properly for a long period of time. It will take more time to render the edited video, and the file size will be too big in the end. As to why movies don't shoot at a high frame rate per second, that's because it costs them money for each frame that they render. Meaning if each second has 30 frames, they have to pay for different things for those 30 frames each second. That's why the less frames per second they have to shoot in, the more cost effective it is for them. Even though today movies don't go below 24 frames per second anyway. But the more frame rates means the more cost. So for YouTube videos, it is recommended to shoot at 30 frames per second, and if you want to add slow motion effects, then record at 60 or higher frame per second. So hopefully you now understand what FPS or frames per second means. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, then leave a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, follow me on other social media platforms at TechBudgie.